Story Collider show usually has a theme, but this show is special because it's sponsored by Spectrum, and so our show, well, it doesn't have a theme. All the stories are about autism. And so this got me thinking about one of the first times I met someone with autism. I was in university, and I was volunteering to teach swimming lessons at the pool at the university. And up until that point, I thought almost every kind of swimmer. I taught screaming toddlers to adults who are terrified of water. And so I had like a pretty big range of what kind of swimmer there's out there. I also had like the unruly teenage boys. They were fun. But this one, I was actually really nervous because they told me that I was getting a nonverbal autistic boy. And so I was standing on the deck waiting for my student to show up. And this dad walks in with a boy in a wheelchair, and he's pushing the boy up, and he has a daughter as well. And I just know instantly, like, this is my kid. And so I'm kind of nervous and trepidatious, and we put the life jacket on the boy, and we get in the water, and he loves the water. And we spend the whole class just splashing about, like kicking around, just having a grand old time, and the little sister joins in, and she keeps eyeing the diving board. She's like, I want to learn how to go off the diving board. I'm like, don't worry, at the end of this lesson, I got you. And so we do this whole lesson, and I take the kids out of the water, and I teach the little girl how to go off the diving board, and she's grinning from ear to ear, and the boy's happy as well, and the dad looks even more relieved because he just got half an hour free of kids. And it was just this really lovely moment. But it was my first experience with autism, and I'm really glad it was a positive one, because I know sometimes it can be hard. But our storytellers are going to share their experiences with autism, and so without further ado...
Yeah, who's ready for your first storyteller? All right, so we got their bios and your programs, so we thought we'd introduce the storytellers with a question, or the answer to a question. So we asked all of them if they could talk about one of the more unusual or times that they've been traveling on an airplane or an airport, or something that stands out to them.
All of our storytellers had to travel to get here from one part of the country or another, even some from all the way from Europe. So we thought this would be good. So our first storyteller, she ended up on a plane that had really, really bad turbulence. And while normally when that happens, everyone's scared, on this plane there was a bunch of little kids, and she was telling us that these kids thought the turbulence was kind of like a roller coaster ride. So every time the plane would like bump, they would all giggle, and which made the entire airplane giggle. And by the time they like bounced down the tarmac, everyone was laughing and having a good time. So let's please give a big round of applause and warm welcome to T.C. Waisman.
So I'm just going to start right into it, if that's okay with you guys. Yeah. When I was 8 years old, my mom dressed me in my Sunday best, and I remember it was a really colorful, flowery dress, and it was my favorite dress. My mom packed me in the car and took me to the doctor's office because she wanted me to be tested for giftedness. You see, I wanted to be a doctor when I grew up, but there weren't many representations of black women doctors in the 70s. So my fierce mom wanted to do her best, and she wanted to give me any kind of a leg up that she could possibly give me. So we went to the doctor's office, and she explained to him her reasons why she thought that I was gifted. And he thought about it, and he looked at me, and he knew me well. And he said, you know, I have an interest in neuroscience, and I think your daughter might have something called Asperger's. And he used words like disorder, and social challenges, and communication challenges. And I don't really know how much my mom understood at that time, but she made a decision that day that changed the rest of my life. We went out to the parking lot, and I remember her getting down on my level, and she said to me, you are very, very bright, and nothing is ever going to change that. But we will never talk about disappointment again. We will not talk to your father, or to your brothers, or to your sister about this. I felt deep shame. I wasn't sure what I did wrong, but I knew that I hurt my mom in some way, and I wasn't sure how to fix it. So I did what I thought was best. I never talked about it. Years went by, and I rarely thought about that day. I didn't want to hurt Mom. She was a hardworking woman, and she'd come home from work tired, and she'd get into her moo-moo dress, which had flowers on it, which was her favorite. And she'd make herself a cup of tea and sit down, and that was her joy. But I tell you what, anytime I put on the Elvis record and I dropped the pin, Mom couldn't help herself. She would wiggle a little, she'd jiggle a little, she'd giggle a little, and she'd sashay into our living room, and we would have ourselves a good old-fashioned dance-off. And that was my mom. She was a phenomenal woman. When I think back, I know now why the teachers and my family missed the fact that I had Asperger's, or what we now know is under the autism spectrum condition spectrum. It wasn't easy to catch it, especially in my case. I wasn't showing the usual social challenges and communication challenges. And because we're female, a lot of times we get passed in the diagnosis because we present differently than males. So I could see possibly why I wasn't really fitting into the understanding of ASC. But there were signs. I had repetitive behavior. And I remember a time in 1979, my friend Stacy Berghauser was having her 10th birthday party. And it was the 70s, so it was a disco party. And she invited her friends, and she invited her family and her extended family. And we were having a great dance-off, and Stacy excitedly went up to her family and said, "This is TC, she taught me how to do the hustle." And so that was it. They brought everybody into the living room, they cleared the center, and Stacy and I did the hustle together. And there was a lot of clapping and lots of noise and lots of laughter and more laughter and more laughter. And my 10-year-old self wasn't really sure if they were laughing with us or if they were laughing at us. As soon as the hustle was done, I made some excuse and I ran out of Stacy Berghauser's place and I never went back. I was embarrassed and I felt stupid and I had a heavy helping of anxiety and self-loathing. I didn't know then, but my 10-year-old self wasn't really sure how to understand this social cue. On February 25th, 2014, Mom died of cancer. I was flying home that day from working with an organizational client in Edmonton. I just landed and I'd gone to the mall to buy my mom a dress, what I knew would probably be her last dress. And I got the call from Dad and I was in the mall and I was devastated. I was really sad for my family. I was really crushed for me, but I was relieved for my mom because finally she was free. I wasn't sure what to make of it. And after a couple of years, I started to think about my life again and take stock of it. And somewhere I remembered that day at the doctor's office. And I thought to myself, could the doctor have been right? Could I have had Asperger's or autism? And then I looked at my beautiful daughter's life, Sunshine, and I thought, could Sunshine have had autism this whole time and I'd missed all the clues? So I decided that it was probably time for a diagnosis. And the reason for that was when I saw Sunshine's life in hindsight, I remember when she was 8 years old, there was a clue then. She went to play with her best friends that she'd known since she was 3. Basically, she'd known them almost all her life, and she was having really bad social anxiety. And I looked at her and I thought at that time, I wonder if this is normal. And then I remember a time when she was 10, we were in a dentist's office, and the waiting room was packed with people. The sound was really low, but then they put a song on. And my daughter and I clapped our hands over our ears. We couldn't handle it. We had a sensory reaction to a high-pitched sound that was in the song itself. And I looked around and no one else was having this reaction. And I think somewhere deep inside, I put that away in my heart and in my mind, maybe to be discovered at a future time, that maybe there were signs. So I decided it was time for diagnosis. I phoned and interviewed many psychologists across British Columbia, where I live, and I asked them just one question. Have you ever diagnosed an older black woman? You see, I was 48 at this point, and I'd been masking for a long time, and masking very well, so I knew I was not going to be an easy case. I found one doctor, and he and I worked together, and on May 17th, 2017, I was officially diagnosed. I was relieved for myself. I was very sad for the little girl who was asked to keep this a secret, and I was devastated for the child who tried to be a typical normal child and failed year after year, moment after moment, experience after experience. And then I looked at my daughter Sunshine's life and I thought, what does this mean? What does my diagnosis mean? What does it mean to her? Sunshine inspired me. She inspired me. At 18 years old, my daughter Sunshine moved to England and got a law degree on scholarship. And by the time she was 22 years old, she graduated at Radboud University in the Netherlands with a master's in human rights law. And my daughter taught me that autism is not a diagnosis with a period at the end. Autism is being open to all the gifts that the spectrum can give you. Now, it's been 2 years since I've been diagnosed, and in that time, I've tried to stay busy. I co-founded a not-for-profit for neurodiverse individuals all around the world. I've written academic papers on autism and higher education, and I sit on the board of the scientific journal Autism and Adulthood. I'm trying desperately to spend the rest of my life working to make sure that my community is well taken care of and well spoken for and has a voice. But really, I'm thinking about my mom. And I'm thinking about why she did what she did. And I fully understand why she did what she did now. She was protecting me like a mother bear. She knew it was going to be tough enough to be a black woman in the world. But how much tougher would it have been if I was a black woman with a neurodiverse condition? She had no idea, but she wasn't going to take a chance. And I love her for it. 2 months ago, I turned 50. And now I have high social anxiety, as does my daughter, and this is something that's on our corner of the spectrum is very, very difficult. Being in front of you, for example, is very difficult for me right now. But I decided I was going to have a party. And I invited all the people whom I loved, and I wanted them to know that this party was for them. I wanted the people who came around and knew me when I was 20 and masking, and support me and love me now, coming out as an autistic woman. I wanted them to know that I loved them. And at one point in the night, the band had to cheer for me and said, let's wish TC a happy 50th birthday. And I stood there, and I looked at my daughter Sunshine, who I was trying to give all the self-love that I could possibly give to her, so she knew that she was going to be okay as an autistic person. And to my husband, Dean, and all our friends were standing around with drinks in their hand. And I stood there in this red duster velvet jacket, which is my favorite. And I thought, this is my coming out party. This is me coming out as a 50-year-old black, fierce woman, soon to be a doctor, proud to be autistic. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage, Jasmin Morandell.
It was a hot summer morning somewhere in the Italian Alps, in a little village very remotely on a high hill. And the sun was shining from a blue cloudless sky, and it was so quiet that you could hear the crickets chirping. I know, none of this sounds remarkable, and yet it was a very special day for me. There, in the big garden of a small hotel, under the shadow of a tree, I and 3 other child caretakers were waiting for the arrival of our families. I say our families because already beforehand we had decided for which families we would be responsible. And so this was about 10 years ago. I was just before my senior high school year, and I had been offered the job as a family caretaker for summer camps of families with hearing impaired children and teenagers. As back then I was very convinced that I wanted to become a kindergarten teacher, I had happily accepted these offers. Also, I was 17 and I really needed to earn a few bucks. So there I was, standing in the shadow of a tree and waiting a little bit nervously. And so I went through all the information I had received beforehand about my families. Only the thought of my second family, though, made me stand up and wander around nervously. It was a mom and her 2 boys. One 8 years old, the other, Francisco, 5 years old. He was hearing impaired and had a cochlear implant. He had severe communication deficits and was non-verbal. He had some motor disabilities, and he was autistic. You should know that never before had I met an autistic child, and the thought of working with him was terrifying. Terrifying simply because I didn't know how to work with a child that could not talk. So I was standing there a little bit sweaty, walking around, and the first car started to arrive, and the mountain quiet was soon filled with laughing, crying, screaming voices, hands were shaking, and names introduced. My first family arrived, and then Nadia, the mom, and her 2 boys drove up. She started to introduce her kids, and Francisco was standing there gazing somewhere over my left shoulder into the distance. He was this big boy wearing Harry Potter glasses with blue frames, and he gave no sign whatsoever of having noticed my presence. That wasn't very flattering, so I tried to shake his hand, and he quickly pulled it away, still observing something in the distance that I couldn't see. And so the week started. In the mornings, the kids would attend music therapy, and the other ones would just play with us. We had prepared loads of games. They would cook grass soups or just enjoy the time with their parents. In the afternoon, the parents would leave for a couple of hours. They would go for a group hike or walk to the village to exchange stories, experiences, and eventually build new friendships. While the parents were gone, we would spend most of our times outside in the garden. You know, play games, sing songs, craft animals from paper rolls, and then in the evening, after dinner, when the kids were put to bed, we would sit on the terrace. Honestly, there was nothing else to do in this little mountain village, and we would enjoy the returned silence of the mountains, observe the stars, and discuss the day, talk about whatever, and just relax. I have to say that I really enjoyed my time there, but I was struggling. I was struggling because I had a very hard time to connect with Francisco. I really tried my best to include him in group activities and try to make it a fun time for him as well, but very often these attempts failed. First of all, because I did not manage to catch his attention, and secondly, because I sometimes misinterpreted his wishes, and that would lead to some aggressive outbursts from his side. Luckily, I had an easy time to connect with Nadia, his mom. So in the evenings we would just sit there, I would tell her about my afternoon with Francisco, and we would exchange ideas and thoughts, and she would soon also start to give me a very, personal insight and unique insight into their daily lives, and about how worried she was about Francisco and about his future, and how she didn't know what caused his condition. And also because she was pregnant again, so not knowing whether or not something she might have done during her pregnancy was really troubling for her. Now, one day, the air thickened and a huge thunderstorm came roaring up the valley. And believe me, this was a nightmare, because the kids had just eaten a truckload of ice cream and the parents were gone off to a copper mine somewhere in the village. And we were there outside, the first drops were falling on the ground, sort of exploding water bombs. And so we grabbed as much handicraft materials as we could and we ran inside, and we had to spend the whole afternoon in a little restaurant of this hotel with 25 sugar-high kids because they had just eaten a truckload of ice cream. And there we were, sort of worried about what to do next, and then luckily one of my colleagues had a life-saving idea. We had packed face paint for emergency cases. This was one of these emergency cases. So we told the kids that they could be whatever they wanted to be and that we would try to paint their faces accordingly. And then we were painting, butterflies, cowboys, the usual things that kids are coming up with. And there were more exotic things like a turtle or a Spider-Man. And then eventually, it was a girl's turn. And she wanted to be a whale tree. Yes, that was my reaction. A whale tree, half a whale, half a tree. And there I was sitting, I'm like, okay, I really don't know how to draw half a whale, half a tree, so I needed to gain some time. So I turned around and pretended to look for something very busily, and that's when my eyes fell on Francisco. He had found some crayons and a sheet of paper, and was now very focused drawing the Spider-Man I just minutes ago had painted on a boy's face. And the boy was standing in front of him, grinning from one ear to the other, very much excited about the attention he got. And I couldn't believe my eyes, because first of all, I'd never seen Francisco do anything like that, and secondly, he voluntarily interacted with another child. It felt like a window into a hidden world had opened up to me. It made me realize that there was so much more going on in Francisco's mind, and that he could be and do so much more than my first impression would have suggested. It entirely changed my impression of this kid. And so, as any good child caretaker would do, I turned around and pretended that nothing happened and finally painted that whale tree. Yeah, in the end it really mostly looked like a rock and a bush, but whatever. So, from that moment on, I would make sure that there were some pencils around and crayons around and sheets of paper, so that whenever Francisco wanted to, he could just start to paint. And he sometimes did and sometimes did not, but this fundamentally changed our relationship as I started to feel a little bit more secure about what I was actually doing. So today, I am not a kindergarten teacher. I am a neuroscience PhD student. And this experience with Francisco and some other things that happened during that time have changed my path into a way where I now eventually ended up studying the molecular and cellular mechanisms that underlie autism. And having spent this time on this mountain with Nadia and Francisco really still changes my perspective of my work. As a researcher, science can be tricky sometimes. Experiments sometimes fail, it can be frustrating, it can be boring because you're counting cells. And I had this one professor who once told me, like, you know, molecular biology always works. Yeah, that's not true. Yeah. So eventually when you're coming in on Sunday evening, you just want to change the media and feed your cells, and then you see them floating around dead in the media, and you're like, what did I do wrong? And you're starting troubleshooting problems that you never expected to have beforehand. And these are the moments when you start losing or seeing the point of what you do, because it just seems too big and too difficult. And thinking of Francisco and Nadia helps me to realize that there is a bigger picture and there is something important about my work. And so I am really grateful for this few days somewhere in the middle of nowhere in the mountains, because they let me be part of their stories. And this story still helps me understand what I do today.
It is time for storyteller number 3.
Yes, all right. So our storyteller number 3. Wow. So her most unusual experience isn't on a plane, but on a train. And so she took a seat that a young man had just gotten out of really hastily. And it turned out the reason he got out so quickly was because he needed to pee, which she had already started to do in the seat. So she was on her way home, so she could put her entire wardrobe into the washing machine. But that is not a great seat to take. Anyways, please give a warm welcome to Blair Braden.
Trying to carry my groceries from the car into my girlfriend Candace's house in one load. September may be the time that the rest of the country is cooling off, but for us in Phoenix, the heat is still oppressive. And what's distracting me from my serious grocery carrying mission is Candace's annoying neighbor, Peter. Hey there, he says as he starts marching over to the driveway to talk to us. We didn't ask him to come over, but this is what Peter always did. It was like he sat in his window, waiting, watching for our car to pull in the driveway so he could come chat. Candace was always very nice with him, but I was suspicious of Peter's motives. He was a single, middle-aged man who I thought just wanted to be real chummy with his 20-something female neighbors. I saw right through this misogynistic attempt to surround himself with pretty young girls, and I wasn't having it. I was tight-lipped, I was brow furrowed, and I gave him all the nonverbal cues I had that I did not want to talk with him. And around this time, I was a new postdoc, so I was trying to walk that line between kind of still being a college student, but also wanting to be a real adult. We had moved out of the college student neighborhoods, which was nice to leave the keg parties behind, into adult neighborhoods that brought a whole new challenge. Creepy middle-aged neighbors. And Peter was just the worst. He knew so much about our lives. He always knew when we had had a party. He always knew who had visited us recently. He even knew that Candace's roommate had broken up with the guy she'd been seeing recently. How did he know all this stuff? We joked that he had wiretapped the house. It was a joke, but it kind of contributed to my uneasy feelings. So you can imagine my shock when Candace told me she had invited Peter to Thanksgiving dinner. What? Thanksgiving was such a special day for us. It was when all of our former graduate student friends got together because we were still all too poor to travel home to our actual families. We rarely invited outsiders, let alone creepy neighbors. Fine, I said, but I'm keeping my eye on him. So Thanksgiving Day rolls around and he shows up, pie in hand, annoyingly large grin on face, came in just as he did many times to us in the driveway and asserted himself into conversation after conversation. I mean, I guess in this case, what else was he supposed to do? He didn't really know anyone else. But as I watched him, honestly, there wasn't much to see. He was really nice. He was really polite. He was very respectful. But I did notice something interesting. No matter what the conversation was, he always brought it back to the sporting events he attended. Story after story after story of the Phoenix Suns, our football team, the Arizona Cardinals. We even have an ice hockey team in the desert, the Arizona Coyotes. He told stories about all of them. And our friends would humor his stories for a bit and then slowly drift into other conversations. But eventually it was time to eat. We all sat at an outstretched table, about 15 former graduate students, and the odd man out, Peter. We had a great meal. We ate, we drank, we laughed. Just like every Thanksgiving, it was a lovely time to reflect our good fortune. Not long after dinner, Peter thanked us profusely for having him. He said he typically has nowhere to go for Thanksgiving. Ugh. A sinking feeling set in. I think it was some pumpkin pie, rumbling with some guilt, and it all came together at once. The social awkwardness, the lack of meaningful relationships, the insistence of talking about sporting events. Oh my God, I think Peter may be on the spectrum, I said to Candace later that night. This irony was all too much because what I was doing in my new postdoc was a study with middle-aged autistic men. And I was loving my new work. I got to take each participant out to lunch in between the MRI scan and the cognitive assessment, and just a time to get to know them better. Because I was totally aware of the social communication differences, I was very patient. For example, I had recently gone out to lunch with Greg, and he talked for longer than I wanted him to talk. I wanted a turn to talk, but I was patient and understanding. Sometimes he was louder than I felt comfortable with in the restaurant we were sitting in, but it was okay. Even through those differences, we found this very genuine camaraderie about how it's hard to grow up in small town Southern America. And then lighter topics about, what do you say, soda or pop? It's a divisive question. So in this different scenario with Peter, I had completely missed the signs. I was embarrassed that I didn't see the connection to the men that I was getting to know through my research, and also just shameful that I could have treated someone so poorly merely because he didn't meet my expectations of that social situation. So ultimately, I had to practice giving myself grace. I was talking with Candace, trying to figure all this out, and realized I was scared. Something about Peter had scared me. I and many other young women I know have been treated poorly by middle-aged men, and being queer has absolutely intensified that mistreatment at times. So we talked about our shared strategy of putting on social armor. When you meet someone that you're not really sure what their intentions are, you put a block up, and you protect yourself. And I realized that Thanksgiving night how quick I was to do that when I met Peter, rather than actually paying attention to how he treated me. In reflecting on all of my lunches with the autistic men I was getting to know, I felt totally safe and comfortable, and I thought, I bet Peter's a great guy too. So from that day on, I met Peter with smiles and eye contact and lots of questions to get to know him better. What a great guy I'd been missing out on. When he came over to our driveway then, we could chat and laugh, and I could hear about his really cool sporting events that he went to. He would help us carry the groceries in from the car. So eventually Candace moved out of that house and in with me to downtown Phoenix. But a couple years later, we visited our old college town, Tempe. We went to the local Oktoberfest, grabbed a beer and a bratwurst, but quickly diverted away from the crowds to a nice bench overlooking the lake. And what do you know, someone else found refuge in that bench. It was Peter. We were so happy to see each other. He was as kind as ever, and I was able to mirror that kindness back to him along with Candace. We caught up over our German delights and eventually said our goodbyes. I was sad as I walked away from Peter that day because I didn't know when I would see him again. Turns out Peter, Greg, and every autistic person I've ever met has taught me so much about how to let go of fear and embrace acceptance. Thank you.
Storytellers, a podcast. We put out a show every week with 2 stories from all the shows that we produce around the world now. And you can get it pretty much anywhere you can get a podcast.
Yeah, so we've got about 14 cities where we host regular Story Collider shows, and then we do special shows like this one. And so the stories in the podcast come from all over, and they're usually mashups of people from different settings. And with that, it's time for storyteller number 4.
Yay!
So when we asked him about an unusual time in transit, he said, my first time flying, we were pulling away from the gate and the hydraulic system failed, which meant we didn't fly out until they fixed the issue. My mom and I almost got off the plane because I was so scared. That's not something you want to hear for the first time flying. Please welcome to the stage, Brad Ferguson.
So, it was my senior year in high school, 1999. I took a trip to Southwest Texas State University to meet with the admissions officer. So I walked in the office. Hello, Mr. Ferguson, great to see you. Let's see your grades. And showed him my grades, and he says, well, Mr. Ferguson, these are abysmal. There's no way you're going to get into the university here. Maybe you should do something else with your life, but I don't think that you're going to be able to get into school anywhere. And so I went home, and I thought to myself, you know, I'm going to make a change in my life. And, you know, most of my life I've been playing sports, I've been playing football, and so my grades were really bad, and so that news really didn't surprise me. And so that next morning I went into the football coach's office, and I said, Coach, I don't want to play football anymore. And so I quit the team. And after that, I decided that I was going to take a break from things in life, and didn't really do a whole lot with my life for a while, and my parents started to notice. And they said, Brad, got a lot of extra time on your hands. Maybe you should get a job. And so I did. I got a job at a local roller skating rink as a disc jockey. And so one day, prior to the skating session, a manager came up to me and said, Brad, today there's going to be about 60 kids coming in from a daycare. And one of those kids is artistic. And so you need to keep an eye on him. And I thought to myself, what the heck does he mean? This kid's artistic? What's he going to do? Is he going to draw over the walls or something? And so the doors to the skating rink opened, and those 60 kids all filed in, and all of them ran over to the skate counter to get their skates, all of them except for one. And this child ran right past me. He ran right past the manager of the skating rink, all the way down the side, until he reached the fire exit. And he hit the door. And this is like a 1970s buzzer that went off, so it's really, really loud. Everybody in the skating rink looked over at us. And the child heard the buzzer, and he just sat on the floor. And he put his hands over his ears, and he screamed. And so I was right behind him. I had skates on, so I got there pretty quick. And I closed the door, got him back inside, and said, hey, this is the fire exit. You shouldn't go out there unless there's a fire or some other type of emergency. And he never said a word to me, never looked at me. And so I took him back over to the skate counter where all the other kids were and got his skates on. And it was clearly apparent to me he didn't know how to skate. He still hasn't said a word to me, still hasn't looked at me. So I took him out there to the middle of the skating floor, and there's the disco ball, turning around, and then the mirror images are all over the floor, and I can see him, he's looking at them, not looking at me, not saying a word. And so I grabbed his hands, and I'm teaching him how to skate. And we probably did this for about an hour. And all of a sudden, toward the end of the session, I remember, I had his hands in mine, and he looked up at me, just for maybe a second, I think. And I remember feeling this extreme happiness. It was really just a feeling that I couldn't quite describe, but I know that I was definitely happy. And I wanted to take his hands and go, oh, this is great, hey, thanks, you looked at me like, ooh, let's be friends, but I figured he probably wouldn't like that. And so all the kids with the daycare left the skating rink. And I went back into the DJ booth, and it dawned on me. My manager didn't say he was artistic, he was autistic. And I knew absolutely nothing about autism. And so I wanted to prove that guy at the admissions office wrong. And so I got into university and started to study psychology. And while I was there, I worked at a psychiatric hospital, and I worked with a lot of kids, with autistic individuals there. And I started to learn that there are some autistic individuals that are verbal, and that they will look at you, and that some of them have excellent poetry skills, and they're able to recite poetry flawlessly, and that they're able to draw things from memory. And it's perfect. And so that wasn't enough, and I thought, this is really something interesting. Maybe this is what I want to do with my life. And so I moved away from home, and I went to another university, and I studied clinical psychology. And I specialized in autism, applied behavior analysis, and neuropsychology. And while I was there studying, I worked at a place called Project HELP. It stands for Helping Educate Little People. It was a center where there's people with autism, people without autism. And while I was there at the center, my job was to help make this little boy, Johnny, to help him make eye contact. And so we're out there on the playground, and all the other kids are playing, and Johnny's over here by himself, and he's wearing his little sandals and his Power Rangers t-shirt. It's as cute as can be. And I'd go over to him and say, "Hey, Johnny, look at me." You know, Johnny, look at me. And if he didn't look, I'd take his head and point it toward mine and say, "Oh, good, you know, thanks for looking at me." But he never really looked at me. It was like our eyes were, you know, two of the same poles of a magnet. You know, they wouldn't align. And so I think it was probably the 101st trial of doing this. I was getting kind of tired of doing this. The 101st time I said, "Johnny, look at me." And he looked right up at me with those big brown chocolate eyes, and I cried. I couldn't help it. I cried. And again, I felt that same very happy feeling just here in my midsection, and thought to myself, you know, this is what I want to do with my life. I want to work with autistic individuals. And so I went on and moved again, and I got a PhD in neuroscience and working with autistic individuals. And just the other day, had another experience. And so I work at the Thompson Center for Autism, University of Missouri. So I see a lot of kids. I see a lot of people with autism, and I work in a laboratory. And when you go into the laboratory, many of you maybe know this. You know, there's screens everywhere. There's bright lights. There's wires. There's computers. There's loud noises. We're doing things like blood draws, and this is a very stressful experience for these people. And so I had a little boy come in, sat down in a chair in the laboratory, and he looked down and he started to cry, and he said, "I don't want to be here. I don't want to do this." And he screamed, and so I tried every trick in the book, you know, trying to get him to calm down. I could not get him to calm down. And I was just about to give up, and we were going to cancel the appointment. And that's when he looks at me and he says, "You know what, Brad? I don't want to do this, but I want to help other people like me." and it hit me right here, as it is right now. I shed a tear. We went on with the research appointment, and at the end of the appointment, you know, we said our goodbyes, and I still don't think he was very happy to be there, but he went through with the appointment. And so I went back to my desk and did some paperwork, and he left, went out in the parking lot, and I needed to go across the street to the clinic building, so I had to go out in the parking lot. And so I saw our participant. He was getting into his car, and he had one leg up into the car, and I think he saw me. He looked over at me out of the corner of his eye. He saw me, and he stepped back out of the car, and he ran over toward me and just gave me this big bear hug. And that was it. He never made eye contact with me. He never said a word. And then he went back to the car, got in it, drove away. And again, I shed a tear or two. And it really, just that experience it made me feel like this is exactly where I need to be in life, and that I can only hope to make a difference with my research in people with autism. Thank you.
So are you ready for your last storyteller of the evening? Say the storytellers. We have two people.
The first one, she was sitting in a McDonald's in an airport in Florida, more than 3,000 miles away from home, when she heard a woman discussing an interesting blog post. As she listened, she suddenly realized they were talking about her blog post. And so she introduced herself, and that was her very first 15 minutes of fame.
And then our second teller said his experience was it was in middle school, and his science fair project, which was a psychology experiment comparing visual segmentation ability in autistic versus normal subjects, went on to regionals, which was held at the Boeing Museum of Flight at the King County International Airport. Please welcome to the stage Ariel Detzer and Avi Caspe.
Why did you do that? I don't know. What were you thinking? I don't know. Why do you even do that? I don't know. Just stop asking me these questions. I don't know. When I was in the first grade, some of the older students in the second grade had cornered me by the bathroom, and, well, they claimed that they would be my friends if I pulled down my pants for them. And honestly, I think I would have done this if my teacher hadn't caught me. Because, you see, they tried to claim that it was my idea to do this. It was only later that my teacher found out what was really going on. But at the time, all I could really say was, I don't know. And at the time, it was true. I really didn't know why I thought this was a good idea.
Moms watch their kids. From the first moment we hold them in our arms, we watch for first glances, first smiles, first babbles. But Avi didn't watch back. 5 seconds, I read that somewhere. That's normal infant eye contact. But always by the time I got to 4, Avi's eyes would slide away. Those years when Avi was a baby felt like a time of holding my breath, counting over and over, not quite to 5. Being Avi's mom felt really important. I quit my teaching job to take Avi to therapy 4 days a week. It felt really important, but it also felt like not enough. I was lonely and isolated. One gorgeous summer evening when Avi was about 2, I went with Avi's dad to a gala at our temple. It was on this pier. I could see the lights of Seattle reflected in the Puget Sound. All these couples were dancing. Jewish couples, interfaith couples, gay couples. I love my progressive temple. And I was watching my friend Joan dance with her wife, just like the easiest thing in the world, just so tender. And I was just hit with this wave of longing that just pierced right through me and turned my legs to water.
When I was in elementary school, the one thing that I remember is wanting to be alone all the time. Like, I just want to be alone and work on my Rubik's Cube in some corner. Or, like, I want to escape the school cafeteria. Or, because all the voices of the people talking was just too loud and noisy. Back then, people thought I was really weird for wanting to be alone all the time.
I remember watching Avi be alone a lot and feeling like I wanted to help but not knowing how. And the school sure wasn't much help. There was this time right before the end of 2nd grade, I got this message from the front desk person at Avi's school, and I could hear her voice on the answering machine getting louder and higher, and I could kind of hear Avi in the background, kind of worked up, and she's going, "Young man, sit down. I'm going to call your mother. See, I'm calling her right now. Young man, sit down. Young man, you're making bad choices." I hate that phrase, bad choices. You know, like there's a lot of choice going on in the prefrontal cortex when the amygdala is all flooded. "Young man, sit down right now or you're not coming to school tomorrow. Young man, sit down or you're suspended. Young man, sit down right now or you're suspended until the end of school." And the line goes dead. "Oh, hell no! You are not suspending my son for a manifestation of a disability. First of all, that is illegal. And second of all, no goddamn school secretary without jurisdiction and without due process is making my son miss the last week of school because he wouldn't sit down." I didn't have to go all mama bear on the principal because even he could see that the whole thing was ridiculous. But that was one of the easier battles.
Then, when I was in the 6th grade, our class was assigned to research a social justice issue of our choosing. The goal was to pick something where you could then go on and enact real-world change. But I felt I just couldn't do that if I didn't pick something personally meaningful.
When I suggested autism, Avi was really resistant because he felt like it was really negative, really stigmatized.
Yeah, back then, the label autism made me seem like a disabled person, or like it was almost like it described someone who just wasn't me. But eventually I decided to research the struggles of gen ed teachers when trying to teach autistic children in mainstream education. And as I was doing this research, I found out that all the differences I had originally thought were me differences turned out to be autistic differences, like the noisy cafeteria thing, or not wanting to do my homework because I already knew the concepts and I didn't feel like I had to prove it to any of my teachers, or when something unexpected would happen and I'd throw a huge fit, even if it turned out to be something that I really enjoyed.
Meanwhile, I'd always felt different too. But I knew it wasn't just a me thing. I knew there were plenty of people like me right over there on the other side of the dance floor. But that other side of the floor seemed really far away. All the things I was doing to live more of the life I wanted, they were great. Fighting for Avi's rights in the school system, trips and friends, and the big one, going back to graduate school for my doctorate, they weren't enough. I still felt like I was watching my life from the outside. It was time to take that last big step and leave my marriage and step out on the dance floor myself.
When my mom came out, it showed me that you don't have to let others define who you are. And then another thing happened. She got really interested in my project about teachers and about teaching autistics in education. And it got me thinking, maybe I don't have to let others define who I am either.
It's true, I started getting really interested in Avi's project and teachers saying they wanted more training. And a lot of the training they do get is focused on managing behavior and not on how autistic kids think differently. Over the next few years, Avi worked with me to develop a series of presentations on autistic processing differences. These presentations became the basis of my dissertation, a teacher training on autistic processing differences.
You've got to admit, it's pretty darn cool when you can say that your mother turned your 6th grade project into her dissertation. But what was even more important is the way it changed how I thought about myself. I no longer thought of myself as a disabled person, but as an academic researcher and scholar. When I was 14, my mom and I went to the Association for Autistic Community Conference, and I was able to give my very first academic presentation about my experiences with bullying and teacher interventions in the public school system.
At that conference, I made a conscious decision to change the way I was relating to Avi. Things like stop asking him to talk quieter, stop commenting on his stimming. And it really opened my eyes to how often I'd been doing it.
When my mom decided to back off, it truly gave me the freedom to be myself. I was no longer trying to mold my behavior in a way that was acceptable to neurotypicals.
Meanwhile, I was way out of my comfort zone. I spent the week in autistic space. In fact, on the last day of the conference, I was one of only 3 neurotypical people there, so they asked me to be on the Ask a Neurotypical panel. And we were having this discussion about disclosing your status at job interviews. And I had this crazy moment of confronting my queer privilege. You know, it's no longer a radical thing to be out in Seattle. I don't have to worry about my housing or what my family's going to say, or even my career. I have clients who seek me out as a queer therapist because I am queer.
For me, though, it is still a really big deal to say that I am autistic. For a long time, I used to be afraid to share this because I felt it would make me seem like less of a person. Now, however, well, people at my school know they can't say things like, "That's so gay," as an insult anymore. Instead, I hear people saying, "Ugh, he's so autistic," as a really derogatory thing. And I stand up and say, "Hey, I have autism and you're talking about me." In fact, there are even programs like the Microsoft Autistic Hiring Initiative that are specifically looking for people like me because we are autistic.
When Avi was a baby, and I was counting over and over, not quite to 5, with that strange feeling of watching our lives from the outside, I never would have dreamed that this journey of identity would have brought the two of us here today.
I am autistic.
I am queer.
We are family.
We want to thank Centre Phi, the venue here, including Stephanie and Antoine and the rest of the staff. Please applaud. Keep applauding.
We want to thank our photographer, Esther, for capturing this moment.
Ellen on audio.
Our volunteer, Vanessa.
The Autism Festival of Montreal for getting the word out, including Cameron.
And we want to include everyone, and thank everyone at Spectrum, including Claire, for sponsoring the show.
Kristen and Montreal Neurological Institute and Hospital.
And we want to thank you, the audience.
And one final round of applause, big round of applause for all of our storytellers tonight.